In this term sheet, again, term sheets can be called by a number of names, term sheets, deal sheets, but term sheet is pretty much the standard terminology you hear. This is a trade finance term sheet, and this term sheet revolves around commodity finance for frozen tuna, frozen poultry, rice, and a bunch of other commodities. Again, trade finance is just about financing that gap between when your client has to pay for their product and their client pays them. There could be a time lag of 30 days, 60 days, and all you're doing is you're financing that. It's a very simplistic form of finance, because as long as that trading cycle is secure, it's the type of deal that's relatively easy to get approved. It's the type of deal that is very popular at the moment. As I've shared in one of my other lectures, if you're looking to get into the finance business quickly and you want to make some really good fees, trade finance is definitely something you want to look at. You just need a little bit of understanding in terms of shipping terms, in terms of what commodities are appropriate, and this is actually a very nice deal to look at commodities that are maybe inappropriate, because we eventually trim this client back substantially in terms of what our initial offer was when we went through the due diligence, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but let's just go through the term sheet. So you have the usual stuff that goes at the head of a letter: trade finance facility letter, dear sir, we refer to blah blah blah, and basically saying the International Credit Committee and the local credit committee have agreed that you can have the following deal. And this was a deal I did for a client, not in a bank, but inside an asset management firm. So the facility type is commodity trade finance. That's typically will be what a trade finance letter says. The amount is $10 million, United States dollars. And again, like an overdraft, you only pay interest on what you draw. The security batch in this particular transaction is unusually wide. It includes frozen tuna, frozen poultry, rice, refined sugar, a whole bunch of commodities you can read there, but with a very strict condition that under point number 3, you'll see all finance stock is to be attached to a confirmed sale agreement. So in other words, we didn't want to fund this client and say you can go out and buy all these commodities and hope you can sell them. That's not the kind of risk that we could manage as lenders. What we wanted to do is say, if you've got a sale agreement in your hands and you just want us to finance the lag between buying the product and delivering the product, that's fine. But where we eventually ran into problems with this client's batch of commodities was around the tuna and the poultry, because those are commodities that have a spoilage risk. Now, it's a spoilage risk you can actually insure, but you've got to be careful with insurance. Just because you have insurance doesn't mean that there's nothing to think about. Insurance policies have terms and conditions. Insurers, if there's a way out of paying, if the client hasn't kept to his commitment, they won't pay. And it's fair. There's nothing wrong with that. Insurers don't wake up at night, in the middle of the night, thinking, how am I going to give away a whole bunch of money in the morning? If the client hasn't kept to their conditions, he hasn't maintained his equipment as well as he should have, didn't agree to whatever he should have agreed to around refrigeration or storage, that insurance policy won't pay. So we eventually, when we looked at the details behind what exactly this client was doing with his insurers in particular, we found that the insurance and around tuna and poultry wasn't good enough to satisfy us. We eventually stuck to rice. Rice is actually a relatively easy commodity because any grain with a little bit of fumigation, you can actually store it for quite long. The spoilage risk is actually very low. Same with fertilizer. So we eventually kept the rice, and I think over time we focused on the rice and the sugar only. Again, sugar is also a relatively easy product to store. Point number 4, we covered this client's finance percentages, also called loan to value or LTV, very common term, and we said we would finance 85% of any receivable, that's any money coming into the client from any invoice he's issued to his buyer. We'll finance 85%, provided that was credit insured. In other words, his client, his customer who had to pay him, was insured against credit default. And we were prepared to give him 85% of that, of course, provided it was qualifying stock. In this case, we felt a little bit risky about this client, so his interest was 14.5%. That was, in fact, that was his total cost of finance. Some of that was paid in the form of an upfront fee. And normally, as the financier, you would get paid as the deal arranger, to put it more accurately. Probably the role you're trying to play. If you're going to play that on an independent basis, you'd normally share in a big slice of that 2.5%, that upfront fee, or sometimes even all of it. And in this case, the client's interest, the sort of the ongoing interest he had to pay on the amount he was drawing, was 12%. The 12% is a relatively high interest rate in US dollars, and that's what makes it quite attractive for the fund managers in New York and London to be talking to those of us in Africa. In this case, the client had to pay a commitment fee of $12,500, and in fact we would take that off the facility fee, so it's not an additional charge. That's just because once the client signs this deal, we've then got to go and do due diligence, and that normally means jumping on an aeroplane, and hence it's not refundable because it's really just meant for the cost of flights and hotels. It's a 12-month term, point number 7. And point number 8, you would agree with the client on when your first draw is. Point number 9, very simply, you're just warning the client in advance that there are transactional charges. You don't want to have arguments later where bank charges and international transfer charges are for the lender's account. The lender normally wants to have a pure return. And then there's legal costs, like with bank or pretty much any loan you do. As the borrower, you've got to cover the legal cost. Very seldom in any context does the lender cover the legal cost. Point number 11, collateral management. It's something that you'll come across. There is such a thing as a collateral manager, a CMA, as it's often called. That's normally a company that takes care of managing the stock for the lender. That's actually why they exist, because you need a third party that if something goes sour, you've got somebody to call as the lender, or the fund manager can call them and say, I need to get this loan repaid, the client's done something funny, and make sure that stock gets diverted to export because I've got somebody ready to buy it, and then the debt's going to be settled and the client will get the change. And you'd normally do a lot of work to make sure that not only you have legal title over the stock, but more importantly, you have actual control over the stock. Because in order to get out of your collateral quickly and turn it into cash, it's not good enough that you've got a legal claim, because the legal claim still has to be enforced. You've still got to go to court, you've got to get onto the court roll. I mean, that can take years, but if you have physical control over the stock, that's a different story. If it's a liquid commodity, like in this case, something like rice, it's relatively easy to find somebody who'll buy a few tons of rice from you. So control is absolutely crucial. Physical control, not just legal title, and that's a collateral manager's job. Number 12, we cover the other security. Cession of debtors means anybody that owes the client, you've got access, legal access to that. Cession of proceeds under a letter of credit. So if a bank is guaranteeing that the client's buyer will get paid, you want access to that on a legal basis. And cession of cash account for the purpose of receivables. That just simply means that the bank account that gets used for your client to collect payments from his clients, you want access to that. And then quite normal in deals of this size is that all the shareholders need to sign personal guarantee or personal surety. You can often have arguments with the client about personal surety or personal guarantee. But normally my counter argument is, look, the moment you don't want to sign personal guarantee, everybody on the committee wonders if you know something they don't. And so normally the only people that get excused from personal guarantee is maybe if you're dealing with a listed company, or if there's some weird thing in the company's rules and regulations, or a really good reason why personal surety isn't legally possible. It's normally something you should want as a matter of standard. Then there are other requirements, just simply number 13. It sounds small, but it's quite important. The letter of credit. This is essentially a bank guarantee. Can't have any weird terms, because what a letter of credit typically looks like is it's got a handful of conditions that must be met, and then the bank will pay. As long as you meet those conditions, the bank pays and asks questions later. So you want those conditions to be straightforward, because by the same token, if you don't meet those conditions, it doesn't matter how valid your contract is with your client, the bank won't pay you. So after that, after point 13, you just have the standard clause that says this deal is subject to due diligence, subject to drawing up legal documents, and there's always a little disclaimer that says the deal can be withdrawn at any stage. Every single bank loan document I've ever seen, or any loan document I've ever seen, has got a little clause like that says your deal is approved, but we reserve the right to withdraw it at the last minute for any reason whatsoever, in our humble opinion. And then normally, just the last clause, you'd give the client a certain deadline by which to accept your offer. Very unfortunately typical in the lending business is, because it's such a complicated world to navigate, clients are very tempted to go and secure multiple offers from various lenders. And then they'll secretly, without telling you, sit and decide which offer they'll take. So I found that the key in the lending business is to make sure that your client's serious. Because to get to this stage where you're drafting a term sheet, as you'll see through the rest of the process, it's a fair amount of work. I mean, I've used the term sheet because it's a very neat way of starting to get to grips with some of the terminology and some of the terms and conditions that go into a loan, but it takes a fair amount of work to get to this stage. So you'll want to know that your deal is done if you present it and get it approved. I would normally be in the habit of sending a client a blank version of this. So in other words, I'd say to the client, here's what your term sheet will look like. And it's a non-letterhead, unsigned version of this term sheet. I'll say, here you go, here's an email, this is what your term sheet will look like, this is what the committee is going to sit on and approve next Tuesday. Are you okay with it? Because I don't want to have any arguments afterwards. Rather wait a week if you're not okay with it, or if you want to debate certain points. They never wait a week, but at least it's a way of saying to the client, here's exactly what I think your term sheet will look like, and here is what I'll expect you to sign on within 2 days of when it gets approved. And normally once you're a little practiced, maybe not in the beginning, but after you've gone through a few of these, You can, with reasonable accuracy, predict what will get approved and what won't get approved. And like I do, you'll learn how to say no right at the outset, because you do your client a huge favor by just saying no, this deal's not going to work. Because you give that client the option of moving elsewhere, and that client will usually appreciate it. Maybe not in the moment, but that client will remember you as the person who gave them a straight answer and said, this deal's not going to work. Because next time they come to you and you say, hey, this will work, obviously you then have the same credibility as somebody who gave them a straight answer.